All right, welcome. This is video number 10F, excuse me, analysis and communication of various prompts to try. And then, even though I deviated a little bit, playing some David Bowie, that was fashioned from his 1980 album, one I talk about in my nonfiction writing, Scary Monsters and Super Creeps, featured here on my shirt. You know, so there you go. Anyway, 4 different poems, different kinds of prompts, the things to try, writing-wise. And then, of course, coming up, there'll be an exercise for you to invent a prompt in which you'll need an example writing, kind of like this, where you say, okay, write a poem like tomatoes. You know, and so then we have to have some understanding of what tomatoes is as a poem, how it works, to create a prompt that would work with it, right? Now, one of my favorite prompts in the classroom is the 13 Ways of Looking at Blackbird prompt, which is one of the first ones I posted, and is really the big example for writing your own prompt. Which was originally going to be in week 4, and I moved it to week 5. So you're welcome. But let me get into some stuff here and talk about these poems one at a time, starting with Tomatoes by Stephen Dobbins. So as I was saying in the Tomatoes video for this poem, I haven't yet found a Stephen Dobbins poem that I like better than this one. I think this is an extraordinary poem, and I started to analyze it in that video, and I stopped myself. But this book is really good. This is, I think, his best collection. And I've read quite a few of his poems because then I got the collected, and I think I got one other book besides. So I think he's pretty excellent. So this is a story, clearly. So the prompt is, in writing something like the Stephen Dobbins poem, to write a story, and a story that takes some twists and turns and is strange. You know, we were talking about this in the writing workshop I'm taking the other night, where somebody was writing short little stories, and you have the opportunity to be very strange in a short little story that you might have trouble sustaining over a longer story, that you might lose the suspension of disbelief that people have, but they're probably more likely to suspend their disbelief for the short story. Now, the short story, like flash fiction, microfiction, sudden fiction, goes by a lot of different names. This, of course, is purporting to be a poem, but only because it looks like a poem in terms of how it's set up on the page, and where there's line breaks. But there's no rhyming, and there's not very many other poetry conventions. Mainly it's a story, and if I made this more like paragraphs, it would look more like a story. And of course, those kinds of poems are called prose poems, and that's permitted as well, right? And so this idea of suspension of disbelief is something that happens with writing. That when you present your writing to readers, they sort of buy in. It's sort of like a contract of the imagination, and they suspend their disbelief as long as you don't do anything as a writer that violates that, you know. So as long as the logic of the thing that you're writing follows a progressive order, and there's nothing that violates that suspension of disbelief, so then the reader gives up. It's like, no, I'm not going to believe in this. And that's why it's harder to maintain the strange over a longer piece. And that's why masters like Murakami, or Jorge Luis Borges, or Manuel Puig, or Julio Cortázar, or Gabriel Garcia Marquez are so amazing, because they're able to write novels, they're able to write long short stories that sustain those sort of what's called magical realism. Though this is not necessarily magical realism, but it is a little unconventional. It is a little outside of the norm. for what might actually happen. But we go with it because it's told in such a matter-of-fact way. And when students and early writers often approach poems that are like stories, they don't tie it to clear enough detail, you know, and action. You know, so you look at this and you look at how it moves, you know. It starts out with what would be called in fiction the inciting incident. This woman goes to Brazil for plastic surgery and a facelift. There's an explanation of why. She takes her new face out on the streets of Rio and she's killed. And it's handled in a very simple, matter-of-fact way. And it's actually, I often get a laugh in the classroom at that point because it just seems so absurd and ridiculous. And yet it's communicated in such a succinct fashion that it often, and maybe sometimes students laugh out of surprise because you're not expecting her to be shot, because the poem takes a twist there. And then the body is shipped back to New York. And in the morgue, there's a mix-up. There's 10 different women. They've all been shot. The young man is sent for of the first woman that we hear about, presumably. There could have been any of them. And so, you know, that's all action, 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 but description and explanation at the same time. But it's moving forward. And then as the young man tries to figure out what to do, there is something that's a little bit more like poetic convention. He can't figure out which is his mother, so he looks at their breasts, which one's nursed him. This is very sensual language. Sensual, not sexual necessarily. But the ending of the poem might subvert those expectations. But breasts, nursing, you know, that's not a sexual thing unless you're Freud. Hello, Angela. Freud believed that the suckling of the infant at the breast was the first sex act. Most psychologists after Freud have disagreed with that. It's the first feeding instinct. It's not a sex instinct, it's feeding instinct. So there's the breasts, which ones consoled him. He presses their hands to his cheek. And then he even tries to climb in their laps. So here's where it gets a little absurd, a little funny. The corner stops him. This often also gets a laugh. Is my Zoom about to crash? I'm seeing a spinning blue wheel. Nope, okay, I'm good. All right, so then he says, let me take them as a package. The corner hesitates, agrees, he has them shipped home. Again, we're into storytelling mode. Action is happening. But it's unexpected, it's bizarre, but told in a succinct, matter-of-fact way so that we're inclined to believe it and just go with the flow. Our suspension of disbelief should be, okay, maybe your experience is different than mine. But, you know, and again, it's still kind of funny. It sets up a joke. See how some people have a little urn, he has a huge silver garbage can. That's like a joke. It's like a setup and a punchline, you know, but it's matter of fact. And then more action, you know, he drags the garbage can into the garden. And then we get this series of details that are true: teeth, ash, bits of bone. And he plants tomatoes. Now we've been waiting for this because the poem is called Tomatoes. So we were waiting for tomatoes to come into it. And his mother loved tomatoes. And they grow with an amazing speed. He takes the first 10 into the kitchen because there were 10 women. And then we're back to the breasts. These are just great lines. In their smooth roundness, he sees his mother's breasts. In their smoothness, he finds the consoling touch of her hands. And then these last lines that are just amazing, and they take the poem in a completely new direction, and we could do so much with what they may mean. And we're talking about a killer ending here. Mother, mother, he cries. He flings himself on the tomatoes. Forget about the knife, the fork, the pinch of salt. Try to imagine the filial starvation. Think of his ravenous kisses. Now, you may have to look up what filial means. You know, it's not a common word. And the ravenous kisses. Think of his ravenous kisses. There's so much, you know, like the humor throughout the poem is sort of subverted by that ending that's full of grief, but full of other things too, that we could do more interpretation there as to what that means. But he devours the tomatoes, and with his hands, no knife, no fork, no pinch of salt. It's not a meal. It's something else. So tell a story. Tell a weird story. That's a weird story, and I love it. Here's another prompt, and I'm going to write these up, and I'll have them in the prompt section. But I wanted to tie them to videos. This is what I would do, as I've told you, in the live classroom. So I want you to have some of these same experiences. Come on, come back. I don't know about you, but I have a black screen. Let's try this again. I had to do this when I read the poem too, if you recall. Yeah, that's better. So, Atwood. Now this is also kind of like a story, but it's not. There aren't other characters. There's description, but it's description of a photograph because it's a self-portrait. So do a self-portrait. The thing about this poem that is really weird is that it starts with the title. This is a photograph of me. So that you get the impression that it's going to describe a self-portrait photograph quite clearly. But then, okay, so it's taken a long time ago, sometime. And then there's a very elaborate description of the photograph, but there's no person. So you keep waiting for the person. Where's the person? Where's the speaker of the poem? Now, this is something we really need to wrap our minds around as we talk about this work, is that I don't say Margaret Atwood, because we don't presume that the speaker of the poem is Margaret Atwood. There's lots of poems where, you know, like Yeats wrote all these Crazy Jane poems where the speaker of the poem is Crazy Jane. Yeats was not Crazy Jane. And as when we get to Shakespeare, we'll talk about the speaker of the poem, and who the poet is speaking, to whom the poet is speaking. So we get the speaker of the poem is telling us this elaborate description of the photograph, but we don't yet have a person. And so after we get this whole description, and when I read it, I tried to keep the stuff that is the reveal, the surprise out of your view until it was time. We find out that the speaker of the poem has drowned, and then the speaker of the poem starts to explain that she, we'll use she just for the sake of argument, because I'd rather use she than they, is in the lake in the center. You can't really see her, you know, and you know, they get this really interesting description. Difficult to say precisely how large or small I am. The water, effect of water on light is a distortion. The effect of water on light, not light on water. Water on light. But if you look long enough, eventually you'll be able to see me. And really, I think a lot of people have made a big deal about how this is sort of a metaphor for women's state in the world, and it's a feminist poem. That women aren't seen, that women are small, and not at the forefront of the photograph. They're in the background. They're the hostesses. They're the support staff. They're in the kitchen. They're cleaning up, but nobody's paying attention to them. And it reminds me of a Suzanne Vega song called "Small Blue Thing." And the beginning line is, "Today I am a small blue thing," and it's a lot. It reminds me a lot of this. Okay. So then the other assignment is, or it's not an assignment, the other prompt. You can, you know, you can have lots of prompts to choose from. You can do you know, as many of them as you want, as long as you do 8. And you can use some of them for assignments, or you can just turn them in at the end as part of the portfolio. Totally up to you. But it's going to be write a love poem. Okay, and this is my favorite love poem. I think this is the most amazing thing I have ever read. That is a love poem, and I've aspired to write a love poem as good as this. Now, I have a couple other favorite love poems that I'll share with you at some point in the future. Kenneth Koch has a really good one that I love, and Sexton has some amazing ones that I really adore, and so on. But this is my favorite. And when I had to memorize, so this and the Shakespeare I both had to memorize for various things in graduate school. And my graduate, I may have mentioned this, I know I mentioned this in another video, that my graduate professor and I disagreed over my interpretation of the reading of this particular poem. So it was interesting that there's a video on YouTube now of Cummings reading the poem. But that, you know, that doesn't mean my interpretation is wrong, kind of like my argument about the Lady Lazarus thing. And I'm not going to do too much in the way of analysis, because I've actually posted 2 things in the classroom for this. So there's this document is just the poem. And then there's another document with the poem and about 30 pages of analysis, if you're really interested, to try to get at this. But I just think that on a basic level, just looking at some of the basic imagery, and it's all imagery. We have the closing and the opening, spring and winter, flowers, you know, and all that, you know, connected imagery. But there's other stuff, you know, the person being spoken to has intense fragility. There's a texture that compels me with the color of its countries, which I think is a beautiful line. There's the touching skillfully and mysteriously her first rose. And of course, Cummings played with punctuation, with lack of capitalization, with these weird little parentheticals that I think are really, really amazing. I particularly, I love the whole thing, but this line, the snow carefully everywhere descending, reminds me of the very end of James Joyce's The Dead, which I should try to get in the classroom. I keep thinking of these things that need to get in the classroom as some of the greatest stories ever written. James Joyce's The Dead, some Flannery O'Connor, those in particular. So I just think this is beautiful, powerful, and relatively short, right? So he brings it all home. The last 2 lines are some of the most powerful final lines in all of poetry. You know, the voice of your eyes is deeper than all roses. Nobody, not even the rain, has such small hands. The goal, if you're going to write a love poem, is to try to invent imagery that is unique and original and conjures pictures in our mind and concepts in our hearts that are new and unique and that we haven't thought of before. And I've been trying to do this for a very long time. I got some really, you know, questionably, you know, I don't know how good it is, love poems. I am not sure if I have the courage to share any of them with you. But, you know, those, you know, I mean, just look at the imagery of the voice. So the eyes have voice. The voice of your eyes is deeper than all roses. Deeper how? But that's just so, that just gives me all sorts of feels. And then nobody, not even the rain. And the rain isn't a person. Usually we say nobody is a person, but nobody, not even the rain. And nobody is actually literally nobody. And the rain doesn't have a body, but it does in this case, has such small hands. You know, so there's all these little delicate feminine images. Small hands, intense fragility. I thought he used the word delicate, the frail gesture. And maybe he didn't use the word, no, there's no delicate. But just, it's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. Aspire to write something as beautiful. I don't know. I don't know if I can. I don't know if anyone can. But we could try. We can always try, because that's the beauty of literature. And then the Shakespeare, right? So let me talk a little bit about Shakespeare, and I hadn't decided yet whether or not I think I'll make it one of the prompts, but never an assignment, you know. So write in a form. And I think the most popular of all the forms, you know, there's villanelle, there's sestina, there's haiku, there's lots of different forms. The most popular of all the forms that have rules that you have to follow is the sonnet, right? And so a quick primer on sonnets, because I want to wrap this video before it gets too long. Sonnets are 14 lines. There are 14 lines, and there's two different traditional arrangements. There's the Italian form, or the Petrarchan form, and the Elizabethan or Shakespearean form. In the Petrarchan form, the Italian form, the first 8 lines form what's called the octave. There are 8 lines, they work together, they're a unit of thought. And the last 6 lines present the sestet. And they also operate as a unit of thought. And often, though not always, but often, the octave proposes a problem. It describes a problem. And the problem in this sonnet is, oh, woe is me, everything sucks, and I don't like anything. I don't even like my favorite things. I am inconsolable. I want to be like other people, but I'm down on myself. I'm cursing my fate. And yeah, I just can't take pleasure in anything. And then the sestet delivers the solution, you know, and the solution is the love of the person being written to transports the speaker of the poem to heaven. You know, it's a transcendent love that makes it everything okay. That if I remember that, and there's an implication there that the love is gone. You know, is the speaker of the poem remembering it to try to keep it in mind, you know, but can experience at any time he or she wants, whomever the speaker is, or is it past? So you have to remember love that we'll say he had, but is gone now. And so I scorn to change my state with kings, you know, which is that the state of the world that in which he lives, is that the state of heaven that the love transports him to, you know, the kingdom of heaven. You know, it's left kind of open to interpretation, right? So that's the arrangement of the Italian. Now this is an Elizabethan sonnet in the Shakespearean Elizabethan form, and in that form, it's organized into 4 quatrains, sets of 4 lines that share a rhyme scheme and are themselves units of thought, like sentences, like an idea that's expressed that all works together. So you have first, you have the second quatrain, you have the third quatrain, and then it ends with a rhyming couplet that kind of nails it, that brings it all together in a satisfying end. The genius of Shakespeare is that he wrote in the Elizabethan form, which is basically a form he invented, with the quatrains, but he also wrote it also works in the Italian organization. The octave in this presents the problem, the sestet delivers the solution. It works in that form as well, but the quatrains work together as well, and it's got the couplet. Now beyond that, it's got a particular rhyme scheme. You know, we see eyes and cries, state and fate, hope and scope. A slant rhyme here, possessed and least. It's really slant. Despising, arising, state and gate, brings kings, right? So you only have one slant rhyme, everything else is a true rhyme. And then the lines are organized in what's called iambic pentameter. Now, of course, Italian has a different meter and rhythm. And this is where it gets really hard. You know, like anybody could do the 14 lines, anybody can do the rhyme scheme, anybody could probably think of like a problem solution kind of organization. But it's the iambic pentameter that's really hard. So iambic pentameter, first the iambic part is the accents of the way we say the words that are unaccented, accented, I can't ever remember, accented, unaccented. It's, you know, I think it's accented, unaccented, accented, unaccented. You know, okay, I'm talking to you and I should know this. I know some people are like, I know. See, we're in the live classroom, you could just tell me. But I'm sitting at a computer, so within an instant, I can get the answer, which I can't get very quickly. It's accented, no, that's trochaic. It must be unaccented, consisting of 2 syllables, unstressed followed by stressed. So yeah, it's unstressed followed by stressed. So unstressed or unaccented followed by accented or stressed. So da-dum, da-dum, da-dum. Or am I saying that wrong? Is it dum-da? See, this is why I don't write sonnets. I'm not good at it. And I have a hard time hearing that rhythm. So that's the rhythm, the unaccented or unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed. And then there's 10 syllables in every line. So you have each set of 2 is called an iamb. So you have 5 iambs, which is why it's pentameter for 5. And that's the rhythm and the meter and the rhyme and the organization of the content. And then this is a love poem. And Shakespeare wrote love poems to a young man and a dark lady. In this poem, we have no idea which he's writing to. There's no identifying characteristic of whether this is to the young man or to the dark lady, because he wrote what were very much love poems to the young man, very much. But it's beautiful. So you could try if you want. I've written some really bad sonnets. I tried, you know. I mean, I was able to get the rhyme scheme. I was able to get the 10 syllables, you know, in a line. I was able to get the 14 lines. What I have a hard time with is the rhythm, you know, iambic or trochaic, which is the Italian one, and so on. I find that really challenging. It's not my forte. But there have been some modern sonnets. William Stafford has a really beautiful one. There's been many others. And so it's not just a Shakespearean thing. It's still alive today. It's not as common though. I mean, these guys, these people back in that time, you know, they spoke in iambic pentameter. They thought in iambic pentameter. It was natural. They grew up doing it. So it became really easy. For us, it's not so easy. And now that we got text speak, we're writing, you know, in text abbreviations, it's even harder. So there's some things for you to think about and some actual instruction. I hope you enjoyed it. Let's go with the outro. Thanks for paying attention. Bye.